Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book Crimson Climb by E K Johnston, the story of Qi'ra. This book just released in the last week. I read it this week, and I have some thoughts on it. But first, I thought I'd talk a little bit about my thoughts on E K Johnston's other Star Wars books. I have read her other books. This is her fifth book so far, and I read Ahsoka, which I loved this book. I thought this book was amazing. I read it the day it came out, and I read it in a single day. I blazed through it. I love this book. This is an amazing book. Then I read Queen's Shadow, which at the time there was a lot of stuff I enjoyed about it, but now looking back, I don't really love what this book was, and so I didn't like this one. And then I just didn't care for Queen's Peril at all. Not even when it released, not now when I think back on it. It just did not work with me. And then Queen's Hope, the third book released, really didn't work for me. So I really did not like this one. So, E K Johnston has one good book in her bookography, her bibliography, but not the rest of her books. And unfortunately, in my opinion, this one is not particularly great. The way I would describe this book is, unfortunately, it is bland and boring, and will be, I'm sure, by the time in a few months, it will be forgettable for me. And that's very sad for me to say, because I don't want my Star Wars books to be that way. I want them to be memorable and really good and really exciting. And it is quite interesting that when you look at some of the movies that have come out, when it comes to the tie-in material, you look at, Rogue One, you had Catalyst, an amazing book. You had Rebel Rising, an amazing book. You had the novelization, which was just amazing. Like, the material for Rogue One was just superb. And then you look at the material that ties into Solo, which I loved the movie Solo, just like I love the movie Rogue One. But you look at the tie-in material, you have this novel Last Shot, which was incredibly controversial. It had some entertaining moments. I will grant, I like it better than some of the novels I've talked about here, but it had some entertaining moments. But overall, it wasn't a great book. And then you have Most Wanted, which at the time when I read it, I really enjoyed it. But the more I think back on it, I'm just like, it didn't stick with me. It didn't stick with me like some other Star Wars novels that tells a kind of prequel story to the movie. And this book kind of ties in heavily. Crimson Climb ties in heavily with Most Wanted, but it has some of the same issues that Most Wanted had, but I think it's a little bit worse than Most Wanted, sadly. So talking about Crimson Climb itself, this book takes place during Solo. It starts right as the doors are closing and Qi'ra is taken by Lady Proxima's gang back to Lady Proxima. That is the start of the book. And then the book goes up until Qi'ra's first meeting with Darth Maul, the first time she ever meets him, which is also before the events of the main part of Solo, the main storyline in Solo. So it's kind of in that kind of flash period in between. And so you're following her as she is taken captive by Lady Proxima again, as she's sold to someone named Sarkin, as she's eventually given to Dryden Voss and the Crimson Dawn Syndicate. And so it's called Crimson Climb because we see her move up through the ranks from just the lowest levels to all the way up to a senior lieutenant of Dryden Voss in this book. And that pitch should be an excellent pitch for a book, but it's just sadly not particularly well executed. Where this book I think falters is that a lot of the minor characters didn't really stand out, and the writing style is just not. It's very difficult to pinpoint elements of the writing style. You look at elements like Delilah Dawson, when she writes Star Wars books, she has this hardness to her books, and this darkness, but yet female-centric darkness that really works for her books, that you can easily pinpoint. Claudia Gray has this element of hope mixed with hopelessness that just really works for her books, and she does a great job at politics, and she does a great job of characterizations. So there are other authors who have this distinct style that really works for them and elevates their writing and makes it so that when you read it, you're like, oh yes, this is so familiar. This writing style is familiar to me, but it's just not enough to pinpoint that I'm enjoying it. It just feels like I'm just reading this story, it's really sad to say it feels like an outline. It feels like a more detailed outline of a novel than a standard novel. And that's really sad for me to be able to say, because I love the character of Qi'ra. I love Emilia Clarke. I love her acting. I loved her in Game of Thrones. I love watching interviews of her. I like the character in Solo. I love the movie Solo. So to see a tie-in material to it is just incredibly, that's just boring, is sad. Now, here's where this book has an advantage that I will point out. I thought that the Queen's Shadow trilogy, the Padme trilogy, was bad because it incredibly limited its audience. You had to be from a very specific sect of the fandom to enjoy it. Not just someone who liked prequels, but you would be like someone who liked prequels, who really liked this type of teenage girl story, who had this this religious and political worldview that had these style and things you like in your writing. Like, it incredibly limited itself in the appeal that the book could have. This book does not limit itself in that way. It doesn't I mean, obviously you probably are going to want to be a Qi'ra fan, or at least have enjoyed the movie Solo to enjoy this book, but it doesn't quite have the limitations that the other books had. So to E K Johnston's credit, she did not limit herself in any way like she has in the past. So I appreciated that in this book. However, that alone is not enough to make the book stand out as a great and entertaining read. This book also, first, before I go more into negatives, let me give a few positives. There are some cool Easter eggs and references. There are some great connections to Most Wanted that I appreciate. I appreciated the connections it made to Most Wanted. There were also some other Star Wars Easter eggs and characters that I appreciated, and there were two sequences towards the end. One where I was like, okay, this is the closest EK's gotten to having a great moment, which is basically Dryden is interrogating members of Crimson Dawn because he thinks one of them has betrayed him, and Qi'ra's in the room when that happens. That sequence was pretty entertaining. And then there's a sequence even later when Qi'ra is looking inside a tomb. For I'm not going to spoil what that tomb is, but she's looking inside a character's tomb to look for something, and that whole sequence reads like an Indiana Jones adventure. And that was actually, I think, quite entertaining. And I think that she made the book kind of fun in that moment, and that's also towards the end. So the book does pick up towards the end in that sense. The beginning has a little bit of intrigue that's good with the connections to Most Wanted, and then the end has some good moments that I talk about. But the majority of the stuff in the middle is where it just feels like a slog to read, and it's just kind of sad. And, I would, in terms of thinking about books that have come out this year for Star Wars, top tier books, you had the Inquisitor: Rise of the Red Blade, which is I think the best book for Star Wars this year, one of my favorite new releases. And then you also had one of the High Republic adult books that I thought was really well done. I think that's Cataclysm. And also, I would guess you could put in there the Battle of Jeddah. It would be up there. And then in it was good range would be the YA, the Path of Vengeance. I think that's Path of Vengeance. The Kevin Scott YA book for Star Wars. And then this is in the it's okay range for Star Wars publishing. And then I think in the actually legitimately bad would be Battle Scars. But I mean, this book, as I said, it's kind of meh. I just didn't care for it. Didn't enjoy it. And it's really sad to me that I didn't enjoy the book, because I think that the book could have done really well and should have done. And one thing I am pleased that the book did is it left room open for more Qi'ra stories. Rather than tell the entirety of the Qi'ra story from the beginning of, or like from that moment in Solo where she gets captured to the moment where she shows up again and sees Han again. They could have gone that route, and thank goodness they didn't, because they left room open that they can tell another Qi'ra story talking about her time with Maul. And there were three things I think the story needed, and what the story should have been. One was the stuff with Maul that would have made it much more fascinating. The second is Qi'ra hints in the movie Solo that she has this dark history with Crimson Dawn, that she's done some truly horrific things. And it's not explicitly discussed entirely, but it's heavily implied that she's done some tremendously terrible things in her life. And you don't really see that. You see her fighting and in some action sequence and even kill a few characters in here, but it doesn't have the weight, the evil, the oh my goodness, what I did was terrible element that the book should have had. And maybe that's just because the book didn't deliver that way, but I just think that we just didn't see that side of her yet. But I think we should, because I think that that's something that we really need to do in order to fully understand Qi'ra's character. But there's a third thing that I think the book needs, and this story needs, and that is with her connection with Dryden. It's very surface level. There's nothing beyond them other than he's in charge of the organization, and he pits people against each other, and he's not particularly the nice guy that he pretends to be. But there should have been something a little bit deeper. When I watched Solo, I was under the impression that there was a further dynamic, a further relationship. And I would even say, I watched Solo with the understanding that perhaps he had an abusive relationship towards her, a physically abusive one. And that's obviously not in this. And this is supposed to be a YA book, so it's supposed to be geared towards teenagers. But I know a significant portion of the readership is adults. And maybe that's because what I'm looking for should have been an adult book. I'm not saying I want to see that stuff necessarily, like I'm itching to read that, but it just made sense that be part of their story, and it wasn't here. And I think that was part of the problem. And so the three elements that the book needed to have, I thought, it just didn't have. And it was lacking in that department, which is really sad. I would actually say, what this book did wrong, I would say another book did right, and that was Rebel Rising by Beth Revis. You think about the connections between these books. Rebel Rising is a book that takes place in the middle of Rogue One, and it takes place in that kind of snippet of time when the movie has flashed forward. This book does the exact same thing. So that's the connection between them. They have female characters who go through a kind of a dark, or it's supposed to be a dark path. You see that with Jyn and her journey here. You don't see that with Qi'ra. Her journey is not particularly that dark. With this book's also a solid 100 pages longer, and so Beth Revis was able to do a lot more story here. Whereas this book is standard length for E K Johnston. It's pretty short. It's only about 350 pages. So it doesn't tell quite as full a story as it could. And Rebel Rising, it perfectly gets her relationship with Saw right, her connection with him. It gets her characterization. You also get some of the YA romance that's really good that you get none of in here. You also have just tremendous action scenes and a writing style that you can easily decipher and be like, that is unique to this book, to this author, that works really well. And so I'm just kind of sad that this is what I was hoping we would get, this type of a book, and instead it was just meh, just not entertaining at all. I'll continue reading the Star Wars books that are put out. Of course, I have loved some of them, and I'll read another E K Johnston book, but I'm just disappointed that she keeps disappointing and yet continues to get more books. I know that there's a sect of the fandom that loves her books, and good on you if you do, but is it large enough that she should be the flagship YA author? Because currently she has the most YA books of any of the YA authors currently. So that's just some of my thoughts there. But I didn't love Crimson Climb. If you did, let me know. If you didn't like it, or if you had similar thoughts to me, I give it like a 5 out of 10. Like, meh. I didn't like it. I didn't love it. I wish I did, but I didn't. I don't have negative feelings like I'm angry about it or I'm disappointed terribly like I was in Battle Scars. But I am just kind of meh about this one. So if you read Crimson Climb, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. Please subscribe to the channel and like this video. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.